Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I hope you all had an amazing Thanksgiving where you spent a ton of time with your family. Mine was a lot different this year. Our plan was to do the holiday on Sunday before Thanksgiving because Ange had chemo before the official holiday, and she'd be down for a few days. But if you've been listening lately, you know my life doesn't really go as planned, and Ange and I ended up getting COVID, and mine lasted 12 full days before I tested out. What really sucks is that my mom came in town with her husband, and my dad was also here, and we didn't get to celebrate the holiday because of the virus. The good news is, I did get to see my dad for a day while he was in Seattle, and my mom was here for a month, so we got to spend a lot of quality time together. And while being a COVID first-timer really sucked, there are so many other things in life that suck so much more, so whatever. The good news is, we replaced our car that we totaled a few weeks ago with a new one for us off of Carvana. It arrives next week, and hopefully we'll have a good luck streak with this car. But luck hasn't been on our side lately. Unless you're talking about my guest list, because with that, my guest list has been incredible. This week, I have another absolute legend on the podcast. Everyone who listens to this show should know about Teton Gravity Research. And if you don't, well, it's time to go check out their website and buy their movies. Todd Jones is one of the founders of this game-changing brand in action sports, and his story is one of a true visionary. I'm not going to spoil any of this two-part episode for you, so what I will do is ask you to tell a friend about the show, share my social posts wherever you see them, and please support the brands that make this podcast happen each week. They are Peter Glenn Skiing Sports, Elan Skis, Stanley, Outdoor Research, and Best Day Brewing. Now, it's time to talk with Todd Jones. I'm going to start this one out talking about your kid Kai, but we're not going to talk about his skiing. When I think of kids, I own one, and once I got a call from him. He was crying, and he said he had crashed his bike and he was hurt. And I freaked out. I raced down the street in my car like an absolute maniac, and he was okay. But this year, your kid broke both of his legs 7 miles out in the backcountry. First, was this on a TGR shoot day?
It was on a film day, yes.
So who was he out in the backcountry with?
It was myself, Ryan Cruz, who was our sled ops safety guy, and Matt Baker.
Can you take us through what happened?
Yeah, so Kai had gone and hit a line on this wall, first run of the day. And then the second run, he went to hit a line that he had hit earlier in the year, and he just kind of pulled his leg up on the run out. It was fine, but he wanted to clean it up and just have a super clean landing. And so he went up and he said, "Hey, I'm gonna rebait that line. I want to clean it up." And I said, "Cool." And he went in and he dropped in and he executed perfectly and he landed, and his tibia tubercles bilaterally blew up.
Huh.
The tibia tubercles are an interesting situation. He still had movement in his growth plate up there. And this is an injury that is common in 12 to 16-year-old boys in sports like basketball and high jumping sports. They obviously don't really have the data on cliff jumping, but basically he hit the sweet spot and the tubercles both blew up. He kind of came in for a perfect landing. As a result of having two blown tubercles, he cartwheeled and ended up doing some further damage to his meniscus. So, his doctor, as we went through all the different stages and things, was like, "Kai, I hate to break it to you, man, but you drew the short end of the stick. This injury, 2-3 weeks later, your bones were moving in a different manner, and you would have just probably bolted that landing as you normally do."
Huh.
So yeah, it was a bummer. It was kind of a freak accident. It wasn't like a big crazy crash or a avalanche scenario or a misread line. Like, everything was executed perfectly. It was this kind of weird youth injury that just happened at the perfect time.
And I believe he was in the zone that he was skiing with Colby Stevenson to close out your movie, Legend Has It. Just to give people a frame of reference, it was some really steep terrain. How the hell did they get him out of there?
We pretty quickly recognized that We didn't know the extent of the injuries. We thought maybe it was ACLs or something, but we knew there was no way we were getting him out. So we called search and rescue, and they were there. We had a pretty stellar response, and from injury to trailhead where the ambulance was, they had him out in 90 minutes.
Wow.
They flew in with the search and rescue helicopter and short hauled him out, which is they come in and they put him in a sled kind of unit and hook that in, and they have responders on the outside working with him and dealing with him. And so they short hauled them 7 miles to the trailhead.
And this is a lot different, I would think, than when a regular TGR athlete gets hurt, because while that sucks, and I'm sure you feel bad when they get hurt, this is your own kid. Like, what are the emotions when you hear your kid in pain on the radio and like you're almost helpless there?
You know, those initial stage, we do a lot of safety training, a lot of training for this kind of stuff. So we went into the mode, and me personally, as you know, dad, but also TGR guy and guy who's been in the backcountry and dealing with this stuff forever. I went into the mode of let's go through the steps, let's pack, let's get him out. I didn't sense anything super life-threatening at the time. So I was like, all right, we got some really fucked up legs and there's no way we can get him out. And so we had our safety guy rip up and go and just start to stabilize Kai and get him comfortable. We had confirmation pretty quickly that search and rescue was coming in and they had the short haul crew on board. I went and started packing out a heli LZ, and then it was kind of all about just getting him out. And then I had to ride out of the backcountry on my snowmobile. And so I immediately started, again, still being in that mode. Once I got into cell reception, I started pinging Dr. Hackett from the Stedman Institute, who I met through the Lindsey Vonn project and is one of the foremost knee orthopedic doctors in the world.
Sure.
And I started pinging him and I said, hey, I don't know what, we just short hauled Kai out. He's on his way to the hospital. So the next couple hours was sort of me and him back and forth, and then connecting in with the local doctor that was going to do the initial trauma surgeries to stabilize the bones. Just trading x-rays back and forth and talking about those initial strategies. And fortunately, Dr. Hackett knew Dr. Williams, who was the doctor on call, who was going to do the trauma surgery to get the bones stable. And so we started going through that. And then we dealt with that process. And I guess at that point, all the things that could be done up to that moment had been done. But still, really, my mind was dealing with, all right, what's the next step? What do we do to make things the most stable, the best potential outcome? I would say even the next 2 months when Kai was in the wheelchair and we had to line up the meniscus surgeries down in Vail, and we consulted with all these different doctors and we went through all the different routines and we did all the different things. A lot of it was just like, I think probably my mind just staying tactical, what are we doing? How are we doing this? How are we processing this? I would say it's more once all of that stuff kind of settled out, a little bit more of the like PTSD, like, holy shit, that's gnarly, settled in and exists. That's just there, that's there. Anytime you go through a traumatic incident in the backcountry or in life or in outdoors, that stuff's there. And you just got to kind of work through it and figure out how to process it.
And you've experienced this a lot. Like you said, you train for this. It's part of the game. But how about your wife when you have to relay the news to her? How does she handle something like this?
She's mom. So she goes into mom mode. And I think a lot of it was, all focus went to Kai and how's Kai doing and what does Kai need and how can we make his well-being better? So yeah, it was, we call those first 2.5 months the dark days in all of our lives. Those were the dark, challenging days. There's no playbook for that. There's no planning. But, we bonded as a family. Kai was living in the living room and downstairs. And so we were it was a very communal situation, a lot of board games, a lot of cards, a lot of watching inspirational kind of comeback things and listening to Alan Watts and just, trying to keep the vibes high in the house, really. And mostly trying to support Kai, but then I think, trying to support each other as husband and wife and as a family.
And I can imagine there's some things that people don't even think about that are so difficult to do when you don't have two legs that you can use. Like, I would think taking a shit would be a total challenge like that. Are there other things that are really hard to do without two legs that no one thinks about?
Yeah, I mean, tremendously. It's everything. It's all movement. It's showering. It's going to the bathroom. I mean, you're pinned, It's a very difficult situation, especially for a 16-year-old kid who was at the top of his game, and that's all taken away from him. On the same note, like, he's approached the whole thing very nobly and learned a lot about himself. And I think we've seen him grow mentally and physically now, nutritionally. And he chose really early on, like, okay, I had this thing happen to me. It sucks. What do I need to do to get back on top? Tell me what I need to do. I'll do it. And, it was a very slow process to start. It's, literally lifting one leg 3 inches off the bed. And then just like little baby steps from there and going through this process. But we've been able to just try and support him in everything he needs and wants and his drive to return.
I mean, he sounds like a totally self-motivated kid as well. And speaking of self-motivated kids, you're one. You grew up with 2 others on Cape Cod in a village called Centerville. It's your older brother, Steve, mom, dad, and Big Mountain Jeremy Jones. And your dad's an Ivy Leaguer and he's a lawyer. So I'm going to guess that you guys didn't grow up hungry. Were your formative years all about beaches in the summer and then hockey in the winter?
Yeah, we played hockey. I mean, my dad, he went to Dartmouth College and then he ended up going to BC Law. My grandfather had figured out Stowe, Vermont, and was into skiing. And so we were all very serious hockey players, just living on little Cape Cod. It was probably a lot more low key back in those days than it is now. And we were all travel hockey kids and played hockey really aggressively. But we started visiting my grandfather in Stowe over some holidays and really fell in love with skiing. And then my dad, after he got out of law school and he started to practice, he started making his first bit of money. And he said, hey, kids, I know you guys like this skiing thing. There's an opportunity for me to buy this small condo in Stowe, but it's going to be all in. It's everything I got, and we're going to want to use it all the time. And it's going to mean that you guys can't play travel hockey. You can still play like the midweek rec league, but we're going to hammer to Stowe 4.5, 5-hour drive every weekend. Are you guys in? And we took a family vote, and Steve, Jeremy, and I unanimously all were in. And I can't remember exactly how old we all were at that time, but I'd say that was the beginning of the real sort of love of the mountains and, the early signs of, a lot of decisions in life will be made to continue to experience the mountains and to experience that feeling of gliding down snow and being outdoors and in the mountains.
Well, before you guys even get to Stowe, when it's 3 boys, I'm sure there's a lot of rough housing, and I'm sure your folks would try to minimize the injuries. But is it true that you had a trampoline position so you could jump off your roof onto the trampoline? And what was the worst of that?
That is true. We did, the tramp, they didn't really have the nets back then.
Right.
So there was quite a few bang up. The tramp was not actually positioned near the house, but when my parents were away or out of the house, we would move it over there because we figured out we could get more air. One of the near misses probably was we had our buddy over and I had the stupid idea that I would brace my elbow up under it and he would jump off the roof onto the tramp. I would like Charlie horse him. And fortunately, like that was a near miss. My arm didn't break. It kind of fell down. I got a little bit of a hit in the head down on the reverb under the tramp. And, a lot of it was, Cape Cod's a pretty flat place. And obviously we're pretty vertically oriented people. So a lot of the early childhood before we got the mountains was just antics like that, running around in the woods, playing war games, just finding ways to create adventure and to create things. And, quite a bit different than what my kids are growing up out here. It's like, okay, do we go ski? If we're going to ski, do we go backcountry? Do we go hike? Do we go to this resort, that resort? Do we go snowmobile? In the summer, it's like, do we go mountain bike? Do we paddleboard down a river? Do we go fly fishing? Do we go hike up to a waterfall? Like, it's just, there's so much more baked in adventure out here where we eventually ended up. Yeah, I look back, I do go back to Cape Cod, and I'm like, how did we get it done? And no wonder there was so many antics and just like silly little things, like jumping through brick walls with our bikes and doing silly, funny stuff to kind of get that adrenaline rush.
And what's crazy to me is that when you get that place in Stowe, you guys have to drive 10 hours a weekend. I mean, if I tell my kid we're driving 2 hours anywhere, he's super bummed, and he has all the technology in the world. Does that kind of teach you how to learn to be bored?
I don't know. We were just always so stoked. And honestly, that was probably our early taste of the road trip, and like listening to music and being on the road and that sense of adventure. I've spent a large part of my life traveling the world, and I just often think of that like transformation you undergo on the road as you pull into like a really beautiful place in a mountain town, and then what it is like to be there and the appreciation of being there and feeling that. And I think that comes from those road trips. I mean, they were, you could say, boring. And I definitely remember, times when my parents would pull over and they'd be like, get out of the car, settle down, because we'd be roughhousing and stuff. But I also more so remember just like cranking the John Denver, getting outside of Boston, getting into the mountains, everything getting more remote, more desolate. And just that feeling of arriving in this place that you're super psyched to be in.
Yeah. And, I was asking about being bored or learning to be bored because I feel like for what you do in life, almost learning to be bored is a skill that you have to have. Like sometimes you're stuck in tents during weather windows, and I'm sure some people handle that better than others. I mean, have you been stuck in tents for like 2 weeks at a time and seen some people just lose their absolute minds because they can't handle the boredom?
I think that our crew in general, by the time we put the crews together, whether it's a tent or a hotel room in a place that you can only ride when you can see the mountains, I think we generally tend to surround ourselves with people we know that travel well. I mean, that's often something when you're like, hey, what's this person like? And they're like, oh, they rip, they're really good, they have this safety asset, and they travel well. It's such a great privilege and opportunity to be able to travel the world and do these things that we're trying to pre-vet that with people that we know really want to be there and want to go on these adventures and are ready for things to go sideways or go this certain direction and aren't going to freak out. I mean, over the years, sure, there's been people that just haven't loved being in Europe outside of their comfort zone. And you look back and you're like, maybe they're not a good person to go on the Europe trip or the crazy, we don't know what we're going to find when we get there trip. Maybe they're just better in more of like, the US or in that environment. But generally, we're trying to vet that crew. And, I would say like as recently as a couple of years ago, we were filming one of the films for our HBO series, Edge of the Earth. And we set out on this 56-foot fishing boat into Glacier Bay to drop my brother Jeremy, Elena Height, and Griffin Post off on the coast to have them start this long adventure up Mount Bertha. That boat run was supposed to be 24 hours. We ran into a ton of weather. It ended up being a 7-day journey. We were getting low on food. And what were the vibes? The vibes were strong, high, and positive the whole time. But you look who you're with there, right? And the camera team as well. Sturdy turtles, like everyone just ready for this, like ready for these things. So you really ultimately, I think, want to be surrounded with people that have that zest for adventure and have the understanding that like we're not getting a perfect roadmap handed to us. We're going out. That's why we call it adventure, right? And right. Exploration is because we are going into the unknown. And it's the process of how you deal with the unknown that is so deeply fascinating and what makes that adventure.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and for over 75 years, Elan Skis has been building world-class skis in the Slovenian Alps. It's real skiers building skis with the highest quality materials in the world. And I'm not just saying that. Elan is not only known for skis, they also build luxury yachts, so there's no cutting corners on anything. It's all about delivering the best on-mountain experience to skiers all over the world. And while Elan has been killing it in Europe for decades, over the past 10 years, they've been building a cult following here in the States, because it's hard not to love a playful ski that's rock solid underfoot, and a ski that makes you a better skier. Their award-winning Ripstick line has proven time and again to do this, and has a waist width for everyone, but that's not all Elan has to offer. Their brand new Playmaker series in waist widths of 101 and 91 have won all the awards, and they're the perfect tools for landing switch in the park or backcountry. So please do me and yourself a favor. The next time you demo a ski, try Elan and ski what I'm talking about. You can find out more about Elan over at elanskis.com. Next up is where I want you to buy your Elan skis from. Peter Glenn Ski and Sports have been getting people on the snow since 1958. They aren't one of the newer internet companies trying to take over the world with product lines and hotels. They do one thing: get you dialed in with the right gear for your adventure or vacation. They take pride in being the best at that. And whether you're experiencing the best-in-class retail experience or the 5-star rated website based on the almost 13,000 reviews they have, Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the products, and if you can't get the Peter Glenn experience in person, well, their website offers free shipping on orders over $49, a hassle-free return policy, and they'll price match. That's right. If you find something cheaper at a reputable dealer, contact Peter Glenn, let them know, and they'll match that price. If you like this podcast, please do that for me. To find out more about all things Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, head on over to peterglenn.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, a brand located right down the street from me here in Seattle, and the only brand I trust to keep my drinks hotter and colder than anyone else. Stanley is the best at this. I mean, they invented the category, and they are the all-inclusive brand that wants to outfit everyone's adventures. Stanley isn't going to sell you a $300 cooler. What they are going to do is offer you best-in-class product for a reasonable price. And these days, with ski resorts charging $30 for a burger, there's never been a better time to load up on Stanley's food storage supplies and save your family a lot of money by bringing your home-cooked goodness to the mountains, whether you like them piping hot or ice cold. Stanley delivers. And while Stanley always offers a code for the best possible discounts to Powell Movement listeners, there won't be a code for the next couple weeks, as Stanley has its holiday deals live on its website through December 4th, and you can save up to 60% off select items. To get the deals and find out more about all things Stanley, head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. So you can't really have a high-maintenance person on those trips because that doesn't really work, and you vet that in the beginning. But when you're in Alaska, say, and you have 2 weeks of just clouds and you can't really go up, I've heard something called Drink It Blue. And can you share the most fun Drink It Blue story that you were around?
Gosh, I don't.
Or one, maybe not the best, just one that comes to mind, because I'm sure, yeah, it's happened before.
I mean, you're bored, and so everyone sort of gathers at the bar. And I don't know if there's any particular story that pops out in my head, especially back in the early days, I would say just in general, skiing and snowboarding, the athletes these days are, and this has happened through the Olympics and through everything, to where the level of professionalism and training and everything that goes into being a pro skier or snowboarder today is much more serious. And what they're doing is a lot more technical, and the tricks require so much more preparation and training. But, in the early days, in the early 90s, like as we all gathered in Alaska, all these different people from all these different towns that had never met, we were kind of all just pictures in magazines. And you got, the Crested Butte boys showing up, and the Tahoe crew and the Jackson crew.
Everybody's young.
Yeah, and everyone's young. And literally just riding down a mountain that had never been ridden down was the feat. And so it was cavalier in that sense. We'd all go out and charge. Our safety programs were looser. People were dodging bullets, making mistakes, getting away with things. And so, yeah, those, when it would go storm and it would turn into down days, people would gather at the bar and the taverns down in Valdez, and there'd be some pretty wild big parties, and people just kind of shaking all of those wild moments off and letting go a little bit.
Nice, nice. Well, I'm going to take it back to Stowe. And like you said, this is where you fall in love with the sport. How long until you start ski racing? And does that get pretty competitive for you?
Not really. I ended up going to this school, Kimball Union Academy in New Hampshire, my sophomore year of high school. And it was a way to ski. It was no Green Mountain or Burke or Stratton Mountain School, but it was where I could go to ski. And I joined the ski racing team. We were more regional. I was never going for national stuff. But I did pretty good. I think I got second or third in my first race. The senior guy who was the hot shot on the team was like, something must be wrong with the time or something. I was like, I don't know, man. I just skied down and laid the turns where I needed to. And that was at, our mountain there was this small little hill off the side of the highway in New Hampshire called Wellback, where I subsequently blew my ACL in '89 there, ski racing. And that was really the end of my racing career.
Okay. And when you think about Kimball Union, it's like one of those elite boarding schools that you end up going to your sophomore year. Was it strange being shipped off at such a young age and like being on your own?
Interesting question, because my youngest Cam Ryder is in ninth grade, and Kai's on a 5-year program, but would be a senior. And I would be really bummed had I shipped either of them off at that age. But I think for me, you get there and there's a bunch of cool people. And again, I was in the mountains. So all of a sudden there was hiking and there was this ability to ski and dryland train and do all these things. And I was surrounded by all these cool people. And so I would say I was definitely not really homesick. It was a new adventure for me. At the time, it was probably my first personal adventure without my family unit. And I kind of took right to it. And so at that time, it wasn't weird. It was just a really cool opportunity and a cool thing.
And at schools like Kimball, they have everything. Like back then in 88, 89, most kids aren't even thinking about computers. Do they have a whole computer lab? And are you getting a head start on the technology that's going to take over everything?
I don't think that we had any super advanced, KUA also was not Exeter or Andover or one of those major Ivy League feeders. It was a solid school in the mountains of New Hampshire. I think we had great teachers. I definitely don't remember any technology that was super advanced. But for me, what I had was maybe I was searching for my place a little bit my sophomore year. And I had an English teacher, Miss McMillan, that I really connected with. And I got really into writing and really into reading. And I carried that through college as a creative writing major. And so that was also an early pivotal moment, discovering all those books like Catcher in the Rye and all that Hemingway, and reading these things and getting really into writing. I think that was for me where the creative side of my brain really woke up. And historically through school, algebra and chemistry and those things, those were boring to me. They were challenging and they were boring. The arts and literature and writing, those were exciting. Those were things where you could just go into these adventurous spaces and learn and discover. And so that for me was really the pivotal moment. I fell in love with that, and I stayed in love with both those things, with reading and writing, ever since then and all the way through life.
And if you fell in love with those at Kimball, I think the other thing that you fell in love with at Kimball, I'm going to guess it's right around then, is the Grateful Dead. Is that kind of where you found a love for the Dead?
Yeah, it definitely where it advanced it, right? So my dad, in the early days on Cape Cod, he would drive me to school. Particularly, I remember 6th grade, the public school was near his office. So he's like, I'll just drive you. And he would play Bob Marley and the Grateful Dead almost religiously every day. And my dad was not a Deadhead, nor was he a reggae guy. But that was where I first heard the Dead, and it was just Studio Dead. And I got to KUA and people had tapes and they had collections. And They were like, you got to go see the live concert, and all these things I didn't know existed, I was starting to get exposed to. And so absolutely, that is where I definitely developed my early love of the Dead and how exploratory the Dead is and how adventurous their music. And, every concert's different. And they're also this band of gypsies traveling around the U.S. and kind of creating their own world and their own environment. And so those kind of Grateful Dead principles have definitely carried through life.
How many Jerry-based Dead shows have you seen in your life, you think, ballpark?
With Jerry, I think probably somewhere in the 90 range.
Dang.
Yeah, that run started in 87, so that started my sophomore year and went all the way to 95 when Jerry died, and saw him all over the East Coast, the Midwest, the West Coast, whenever we could find time. That was something we'd love to go do. And then of the post-Jerry iterations, quite a bit less, just because we got busy with TGR and with skiing and with the outdoors and with traveling and just getting busy working and doing that. But I have seen some number of shows for every iteration of the band since Garcia. But that number probably only totals 25 from Jerry passing to now. So definitely less, but the love is still there.
And I would think when you're younger, all these Dead show experiences are a total adventure. I mean, they're part of the adventure lifestyle that you like. Can you think of like the best, wildest, most fun Dead show experience that you had?
Gosh, defining which Dead experience was the most fun is very hard, right? Because they're all well above like the 90% stoke meter.
Yep.
But I think the ones that involved the road trip and cruising, and we went to Alpine Valley in 88. It was the furthest I had ever driven from Cape Cod. So that's in Wisconsin. And it's just me and a couple of my friends. And we're on a road trip in the middle of summer. And we're going to see the Grateful Dead. And we're going to go there and we're going to camp and we're going to hang out. And I think that, that was probably the one. And those particular shows happened to be off the charts, still regarded as some of the best over the years. We went to Niagara Falls and saw that along the way. It wasn't just about driving and getting to see the Dead. It was about experiencing America and the country and seeing all these new places. And so that one definitely sticks out. There was another one going down to Hampton to see the Dead. They had to build themselves under the Warlocks because the Grateful Dead had been banned from the Hampton Coliseum, which has the nickname the Warlocks. Those were the shows where they busted out Dark Star for the first time in however many years and Bid You Goodnight and all these songs. Those were really pivotal. But along the way down, we stopped in Washington, D.C. and went and saw the AIDS blanket. And this was at the height of the AIDS epidemic. And that was really powerful moment that I always remember. And that's where like that whole thing is like, it's not just about when the lights go down and the music comes on. It's about the whole experience and who you're with and seeing your country and seeing all these things and having adventure.
Yeah, I saw them a few times back then as well. And I will say that the adventure part of it and the parking lot as well was probably my favorite parts of everything. These days, in the land of everybody and their mother creating Dead products, it seems like TGR has more than just a one-off, one-year, one-product deal. How did your whole Dead licensing deal come together?
Yeah, that's a good question, good story. So I got a call from this guy, Brian Francis, who actually works with us now full time. But he called and he said, hey, I'm a part of the team that's licensing Grateful Dead stuff, and they really want to get into the ski world. And we want to do stuff with you guys, with your product line. And we know you're getting into this optics thing. And so like some goggle stuff with you guys. But, we could use some help getting towed into the ski world. So I scratched my head and had light bulbed. And the year prior, I had been on a trip out to Mammoth with Chris Benchetler and Kai and Nikki Kiefer and the Atomic team. And we were testing the shift bindings and doing some product photography and content creation stuff. And I just remember one night after dinner hanging out at Chris's house, and he busted out a guitar and started strumming the Grateful Dead. We sang a couple songs. And I put that away. I was like, oh, cool. I didn't know you were a Deadhead, Chris. That's awesome. He's younger, so I don't think he ever saw Jerry.
Right.
But when Francis called me, I light bulbed, and I was like, well, okay, Chris loves the Dead. Chris has his own ski line. Chris is really into the graphics and art and design. What a more perfect person to spearhead this. And for that matter, who can push it through, right? Like, I think the Dead is a lot more popular right now today than they were even 5 years ago when we started that project. So I was like, knowing some of these rigid ski brands and things and wanting to put the Dead in a premium place, and Atomic being very premium when it comes to skis, and Chris's ski being my favorite ski, I was like, this is a perfect opportunity to combine so many of my people and things that I love together. So I connected them, and that really started the journey right there. The initial focus was on Atomic and Chris and the ski, as well as getting some of the TGR merchandise stuff launched. And then it's just exploded from there.
I mean, you have a whole product line now, and it all looks great. And I would think when it all looks great, the approval process, is it a pain in the ass, or do they make that easy on you?
It's a process, but I feel like we've worked together now for so long, which is so amazing to me. Being a Deadhead back in '89, I never would have expected that we would be working in conjunction with the Dead on such a regular basis. But I think we know them. We generally know what they like, what they don't like. And so as we're starting the design process on certain products, we generally know the parameters. So we're bringing stuff to them. 95% of the time it's approved. There might be a little tweak here or there that we have to adjust before approval, but it's generally been just such an awesome and surreal and amazing experience.
That's awesome. And I guess it's like the opportunity of a lifetime to work with them. Do you get any special privileges? Like, do you get to meet Bobby or anybody in the band or get free tickets?
Funny, because probably the 1989 Todd Jones would have tried to tap that quite a bit harder. But with COVID, most bands shut down any kind of comp programs. But we do get early access to purchase tickets. And there has been interactions with the band. I was not there because when we released the Lindsey Vonn film, we had a world premiere in LA, but we were also world premiering the movie that Chris made in conjunction with us, Fire on the Mountain, in New York. And there was a Q&A, and Mickey Hart and Bill Walton came out on stage with Chris and Brian Francis for that. Had I been there, I would have been on stage, so I would have had that moment. So no like crazy access thing, but, we definitely are tapped in. And then, I've had other friends say, oh, yeah, Mickey said he really likes this new design that you guys did. And so I think it's really cool that those guys are sitting in meetings and things are being run by them and they're saying yes. But, I haven't overflexed it.
It's time for my second round of sponsors. And even before Outdoor Research started sponsoring this podcast, I was rocking a lot of their gear. Because nothing else I've used before holds up in the brutal weather that the Pacific Northwest delivers. Everywhere you go in the PNW, you're going to see a ton of OR gear. And that's because the locals know that while other brands may spend a lot more marketing dollars, OR keeps you drier and warmer every time. And that's what it's all about. Well, it's also about looking good. And while OR used to be all about technical mountaineering gear, and they still do that, they've changed a bit. They've hired new designers and partnered with some of the most incredible athletes in ski and snowboard, like backcountry legend Mark Abma, world champion freeskier Troy Podmilsack, X Games gold medalist Zoe Atkin, and snowboarder Neil Provo, who are making sure the new fits look as good as they perform in the elements. You can check out all things OR over at outdoorresearch.com, and when you check out, enter the code TPM25, that's all caps and the number 25 with no spaces, and I'm going to save you 25% off your order. Sale items and pro products are excluded. My final sponsor, and one that's a daily driver for me, is Best Day Brewing. They are hands down the best flavors in non-alcoholic beer. That's right, life isn't all about drinking too much. It's all about having your best days ever, and to do that, you need something that won't slow you down. That's where Best Day comes into play. It has all the flavor of your alcoholic beer, but none of the alcohol. Meaning you can have a few, and then you can drive yourself, your kids. You can drive anyone, anywhere, because you're going to be clear-headed and ready to go. I'm not telling everyone to quit drinking alcohol altogether. Sure, a few beers can be fun, but now, when I drink alcoholic beer, I mix a few best days in to make sure that I'm not that guy. You know what I'm talking about. And if you're cutting out alcohol completely, congrats. Finding best day will make that easier than ever. And coming in at less than 75 calories, you won't be packing on the pounds like your regular IPAs do. Best day is brewed for the doers of winter. The skiers, the snowboarders, the snowmobilers, the sled doggers, the ski bladers, the splitboarders, the racers, the snowshoers, and everyone in between. So next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Best Day. And if you can't find it at the store, you can always go to bestdaybrewing.com or find it on Amazon. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. So I believe there's a time maybe around your senior year in high school or maybe your freshman year in college where your brother Steve, he takes a semester off of school. He moves to Telluride and it's a terrible winter. He ends up in Jackson following the snow. And when you visit him out there, does everything change? Like you aren't worried about East Coast skiing anymore when you see the terrain that the West has?
Yeah. So my previous Western experience had been one trip in the middle of summer to Mount Hood, staying at Govey, racing for about a week. I remember it as being cool. It definitely was not life-changing. We were just skiing on a glacier in the middle of summer. It was cool. It was beautiful. But it didn't click with me. And that was like mid-high school years. And so my sophomore year, I was at St. Lawrence University in upstate New York, still way into skiing, but just no longer racing, just really into going skiing any free minute I had. And Steve had, as you said, moved out west to take a year off from college and ended up in Jackson. And spring break comes and I go and I visit him in Jackson. And well, actually, my first run, it was funny. We rode the tram. We go up to the top of Corbett's and Steve's like, I'm going to drop in here. We were with his friend Caroline. He's like, Caroline, will you take Todd around and we'll meet at the bottom? Steve drops in, flashes it. And I'm like, screw that, I'm going in. And I drop in and get completely yard sailed, but I'm stoked. I'm not injured and I'm pumped. And that rest of that trip, I was just chasing him around. He had kind of figured out how to jump cliffs, how to do all these things that we found things to jump off in Stowe, but we weren't really doing it nowhere near skiing steeps and skiing this kind of terrain that Jackson had. But I was blown away. And before I even left Jackson, I was like, I'm going to do that same thing as he did. I'm going to take a year off from school and move to Jackson and do this ski thing because I was completely just blown away and fell in love. And that was really the transformative trip and moment. The rest is history. We never went back. That was it. We've been out west ever since then.
And when you think about that, I mean, St. Lawrence University is a great university. And I'm not even sure where Steve went, but I'm guessing it was a very good university as well. And while you guys both did go to school in Montana, it's not the same level of school as where you were at beforehand. What did your folks say when you have like an Ivy League educated dad? I don't know where your mom went to school, but when you decide, hey, I'm going to bypass these private colleges that you guys are putting us through to be a ski bum and wash dishes and not really focus on school and life like you thought I was going to.
They were generally cool with it. That was the 90s. There was the whole real estate crash. And so it timed out fairly well. We kind of lost everything that my dad had built up.
Me too.
So there you go. So those schools were extremely expensive. My parents being parents were like, we will figure it out. We will do whatever. Don't let that stress you if you need to stay there. And I don't think anyone was totally planning that at the time, but there was a sense of, okay, this is a big relief on the family who's kind of does not have the means to support this anymore. So we ended up kind of chipping away, living in Jackson, back and forth between Jackson and Missoula. And Missoula was $900 a semester versus who knows what, it was $35,000 at the time.
Yeah.
To go to St. Lawrence. So over $15,000 a semester. We were literally $900 a quarter semester. And our living and rent was nothing. So we would do winters in Jackson, and then we would kind of chip away at school summer and fall semesters. And then we got invited to go. Well, then we started poking around Alaska, and we ended up going commercial fishing and we started making good money on commercial fishing boats. And one of those cycles, like year 2 or 3 of that cycle, we were like, hey, let's buy a film camera and make a movie, make our own movie. So at that point, I think Steve has 1 class to graduate. I had 3 classes, but we were making good money on the fishing boats, and we had bought a camera, and we had started TGR. So we've never been back, and we're both really close to graduating with pretty good grades. And
well, you got a little ahead of ourselves because, in thinking of Jackson and skiing there when you're younger, especially those first few years, the terrain and access is incredible. But these days, like, the locals are priced out of living in town because it's all about the rich, it seems like. But when you moved there, was it just full on Wild West?
it really was. I always say there was like 150 ski bums, maybe 100 ski bums. There was like 10 snowboarders, a bunch of locals and cowboys and ranchers, and there was very little fancy stuff. And it was a pretty raw scene. And the skiers and boarders that were there were really hardcore. And, no one was in anything for amenities or any kind of fancy stuff. And it was really hard to get to Jackson. There was no direct flights. So it was off the radar. And, it stayed off the radar for, I've been out here for over 30 years now. I'd say the first 15 years, it was completely off the radar. And it wasn't until like 10 years ago, it started to change at 15 years ago, but like 10 years ago, it really started to transform and sort of become, a hot place for the rich and famous.
And then another thing about Jackson was, especially people might forget about it back then, but the backcountry gates were closed and you could get in trouble for heading out. Was it almost like you're a part of a secret club breaking the rules if you were heading out into the backcountry back then?
Yeah, I mean, that was, the Jackson Hole Air Force, and you had Benny Wilson and Howard Henderson and Dave the Wave and Ty Vanderpool and all those guys. Like, they were the generation that really pieced all that stuff out. Granite Canyon, all the South Boundary stuff. We were the young kids. It was me and Steve and Micah Black and Rick Armstrong and this whole crew of the younger generation that were just slowly getting anointed into the Air Force. We were following in their footsteps, but it was very much, that Air Force, swift, silent, deep mentality. And the more we rode here, the more we knew where the goods were, the more we wanted to go ride them. And that was a really cool, funky time.
What happened when people got caught by patrol? Were they cool or were they total dickheads?
Depended on the patroller. There was the particular patrollers that really loved the cops and robbers game, and they would hide out in the woods and they would try and anticipate when someone would be going and doing something, or they knew where we'd be coming back in from, and they would go for the chase. They were looking for blood, so they would want to bust you. Back in the day, they would clip the corner of your pass. So you'd get it clipped and you'd get kicked off the mountain for a certain amount of time. And then your ski pass had 4 corners. So you could sustain as many clips as your pass could hold, basically. So that was the game. A bad year, you might have 3 clips. I don't think any of us really ever got to the full 4-clip, full band program, but definitely a lot of us with a corner clipped off. A whole other side of patrollers that definitely didn't want to see it. That wouldn't even ski over by a boundary where someone was coming back in. You'd almost see them traversing away from like where you'd be coming back in up a little higher just so they didn't even have to get into that situation. So definitely a mixed bag, but as much as we loved the game, I think the patrol liked the game too, and it was a funky time. We'd also go into the boom boom room and party with them after, and they knew we were out skiing all that stuff. So there was a lot of unspoken stuff going on there and some mutual respect. And then again, the guys who they wanted to bust.
And then what did it take to get those gates open? Was it a bunch of lobbying by you guys, or how did that happen?
There was a kid, Coombs got popped and banned, and that was a big deal. It was kind of a gray area, but he was really good friends with Connie Kemmerer. She didn't want the ban, but he got banned for life. And at that point, he had Valdez Heli ski guides going. He had kind of discovered Le Grave. So he was largely over it. He was like, whatever, but he had a condo in the village. You know, it was a bummer for everyone. So that was like a big moment that I think everyone had to be like, what are we doing? Is this worth it? Why is this awesome community member banned from here? Are these boundaries real? Like, what's the point of the whole thing? And then this kid, Don, got busted and like booted for life or for a really long period of time. And he started a petition to get signed. And then I also believe at the time, you know, they used to open the boundaries when it was corn cycles. And so I think there was a combination of like Coombs and this petition from all the locals. And then this insurance question of, okay, when we decide to open the boundaries, we're making a decision that it's safe out there. And so there was some bureaucracy that said, hey, it's better for you if you just have a gate that says you go out here and it's really dangerous and you can die than actually opening and closing it. Because that was always a culture of the gates did open a few times a year and it was epic, but it was always corn. And so I think the trifecta of those things caused the resort to say, we're going to open the boundaries. And that was game changing, you know, in the US, if not all in North America. That was the first. Everyone's always referred to Jackson as this European ski experience. We now were really the first European style ski resort where you just ski out into the wild blue yonder and, you know, there's no safety net following you around. You are on your own. So it was a pretty epic moment. And, you know, those early days too, they were sick because it largely was just the locals who had been there, who had been breaching those boundaries, that were reaping the benefits of them being open. So it was like, they're open. Now we're out there skiing them in POW and Bluebird, classic lines like Smart Bastard, Cave Air, all kinds of first descents that you could never hit in corn were being discovered. So that was like such a rich time when there was no guide program. There wasn't all these people that were coming out to ski outside the boundaries, to have this European style ski experience. And so there was a few years where it was really epic.
That's so cool. And going back a little bit, both you and your brother were sponsored skiers. Did that happen through shots published in Powder? Do you go to trade shows and try to sell yourself? How are you able to get sponsors? And is there any money involved, or was that reserved for a select few?
Very little money. I mean, this is like early 90s, you know, so you had the whole stump era where I think, you know, Schmidt and Plake and Hattrop and that crew had tapped into a little bit of money and a little bit of a pro skier thing. But then you had Trevor Peterson and Eric Bahota on the rap film side of things that had forged a little bit of a path, but it was a very select crew. We were just photo kids, the goal to get shots published in Powder Magazine and other ski publications. And we had Bob Woodall and Wade McCoy set up at the base of the mountain in the hostel. They were kind of like the photographers of the Jackson Hole Air Force and sort of the gateway to being, I always say, you know, people are like, oh, you were a pro skier. I was like, I was a low level pro skier. I got free gear and I got the occasional trip covered or $500 to go travel somewhere and do something. So it was very, very little money in the process at the time, but it was free gear and we were washing dishes and doing these pretty low paying jobs. So getting free skis and free outerwear was a huge deal.
And I would think it would be really cool to see yourself in Powder Magazine as a dish dog at that point. But something I had no idea about until I started doing the research for this podcast was that you filmed with Warren Miller. And while that had to be exciting, getting invited to shoot with Warren, when you suggested some serious lines, what did the powers that be at Warren Miller have to say about that for you wanting to go all in for them?
Yeah, that shoot, I think it was called Endless Winter, but they came up and the angle was the brothers segment. So it was the Jones brothers and the Zell brothers. So it was Jimmy Zell and Jeff Zell. And the Zell brothers are these legendary skiers. Jimmy passed from ALS, but he was one of my big mentors in skiing and life and just being a ski bum and what really matters and how hard to chase it. So that shoot went down and they showed up and, you know, Steve and I were there every day, 20 minutes before we were supposed to be there, ready to rumble. We were on Rosignol skis at the time, again, just getting some flow. Rossi was a sponsor of Warren Miller. That was kind of how we got in. And then there was the Zell brothers. And for us, it was the biggest opportunity in the world. So we were roaring to go. We didn't want to like make a turn in front of the tram. We wanted to go show them all of these killer lines like Central Couloir and Once is Enough and Twice is Enough. We wanted to capture the kind of skiing that we were all excited about doing. So I think that was a little bit of tension between us and the film crew. And then also during that 10-day, 2-week shoot or whatever, the Grateful Dead happened to be playing in Salt Lake City. So Grateful Dead, once again, big part of our life. Well, Jimmy Zell decides to get sick and go down and see this incredible run of Dead shows, which I look back on. I'm like, I wish I had gone to those. Those were absolutely heater shows. But he goes down there, so he's sick. They kind of sense that there's a little bit of shenanigans going there. But it is funny because like the Jimmy Zell going to the Dead in Salt Lake became a negative feedback loop to Warren Miller and Rossi. That kind of got us dropped from Rossi and no path forward with Warren Miller, which we would have been perfectly happy with. And so we were kind of kicked out of that club. And that was one of the things that led us to go, screw it. That was lining up with us being on the fishing boats and having started to make a little bit of money and having the resources to buy a camera. So we said, screw it. You know what? Let's buy a camera and let's film our friends and the kind of skiing that we think should be showcased. These big lines, these top to bottom runs, not this setup stuff that some of that could be construed at the time.
And when you think about it, you've kind of painted the picture of like Doug invites you to Valdez, you go skiing, heli skiing with him. I think it's probably back in the day where like, was it back in like the Farmer and Parada, like $25 tokens for heli bump days?
Oh yeah. Yeah, totally. And Doug was like, he figured out, he's like, I know where to go, so I can get people to buy my seat and I'll show them where to go. Because we were all dirtbagging, right? And so Doug was doing that. And then Doug figured out, oh, you know what? I could charge them to have me show them where to go. So not only pay my seat, but actually make a buck or two. But, you know, it was just him and like Jim Conway. There was only 2 or 3 of them that were actually like doing that informal paid guiding thing. And I remember someone came up to him and they were like, hey, I want to get in the program. And Doug was full. And we were living in a tent in the parking lot. And he was like, I'm busy for the day, but those guys over there, they know where to go. And if you buy their seat, they'll show you. And so those people walked up to us, and that was kind of the start of it. And yeah, I think it was $25 for a plane bump, $35 for a road hit heli bump, and then maybe $50 for a bump out off the road where you then had to buy another $35 chip. So you had to have both chips to get back to the road to get out of the mountains.
So you've got that going on, which is incredible. But have you guys also seen, because I think MSP might have been first to the plate with the kind of movies that you make, but had you seen Nachos and Fear or Soul Session, or was Soul Sessions the first MSP movie you saw? And when you see something like that, are you like, fuck, we can do that?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I was largely raised on the Stumpy movies.
Sure.
Were super pivotal for me, but in the early days, pre-TGR. So I think MSP at the time, it wasn't Nachos and Fear, and Soul Sessions for sure was one that I liked. The Tribe was the MSP film. I think they were real adventure films or something at the time.
Yep.
That I saw that I was like, that's cool. That's kind of what we're doing as well. We should capture that. And I don't know the exact timeline if that Continuum came out at the same time, but I just remember seeing that and seeing that vibe and definitely being like, that's cool. That's something we want to do. And then for us, a lot of our motivation was, you know, Rick Armstrong and Micah Black had a really powerful segment in a rap films movie. We had that Warren Miller experience. We had that whole Air Force crew here in Jackson. We had a whole thing here. And that was also a lot of the people that were migrating to Alaska. And other than like little opportunities here and there, no one was really capturing them. So that was a big motivation for us with TGR, was to get these cameras and to make a movie and film all our friends doing the stuff that we do and the kind of skiing that we're seeing.
Did you realize that you could put skiing and snowboarding together and be like the only movie that has A-list skiers and snowboarders? Because I feel like in the beginning, That's a big differentiator from anybody else. Is like you had your brother Jeremy, who was probably able to get out of race by that point and recruit some other snowboarders. And like you had the best of both worlds in your movies. I mean, did you see that in the beginning?
It happened pretty organically. While the ratio of skiers and snowboarders in those early days in Jackson was way more skiers than boarders, like we were all one group of people. We were all ski and snowboard bums. At the time, you had Big Bear in California. You had like the skiers versus snowboarders mentality. But in Jackson, we were all just mountain people, alpine people riding the mountain, hanging out together. So there was never a divide and never a battle or a war between skiers and snowboarders. Of course, my brother was a snowboarder. My cousin Adam Hostetter was a snowboarder. I was in my early days of guiding. I was guiding Standard Films and Johan and Victoria Jalouse and Jim Rippey and Tex Davenport. And so when you got to Alaska, same thing. Skiers and snowboarders weren't really separate, although the boarders were bombing the mountain harder than us. We were kind of all together, and any of that little BS that was going on in California or the East Coast or wherever never existed in our world, never existed in Jackson, never existed in Alaska. And then the fact that my brother Jeremy was really into it and we wanted to hang with him, and it just happened really organically for the most part. Why not do it? I guess was our take. Like, of course we wanted. The whole thing's always just been about like living the lifestyle and doing the thing that we love. And so we wanted to do that with our brother Jeremy and our cousin Adam. And then we met the Standard guys, and then Johan and Jeremy formed a relationship. And Johan was like, I want to go film with Jeremy and TGR. And we'd give the footage to Mike. So it was really just a natural thing for us.
And to fund everything, like you said, it was in the 90s, and you could like read in the back of Rolling Stone, like, go to Alaska in 3 months, make $25,000 on a commercial fishing boat. Was that actually what you guys were able to do? Because I remember reading that stuff and being like, I should maybe think about that. And I never did. But I mean, were you able to make a killing, like each of you, when you worked on a commercial fishing boat?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. We did very well for a 5-year period of time. I mean, we would have crazy paydays. My second fishing trip ever, I went out on a 48-hour halibut longlining opener, and my take was $10,000, which at the time was massive.
Yeah.
And that was when I decided, I was like, okay, what's the next fishery? And I ended up going up to Bristol Bay and made a bunch of money there, and then went back longlining that fall and made more money. So we got in this cycle where we would fish for 4 or 5 months a year, and we weren't paying rent back home. We would pack up, go to Valdez, do our free skiing and whatever little guiding work we got, and then get on the fishing boats. And the fishing boat, they fed you. That was room and board. You lived on the boats in the harbor when you were in port. So we would come home largely with all of that money, and that was our take. And that was enough to travel around and survive the winter and be a ski bum. And then one of those cycles, we bought the camera. Me and Dirk Collins and Steve pulled together, I think $3,500 each, and we bought an old Auraflex 16 millimeter camera and a tripod and a lens, and turned the cameras on and started filming.
That's pretty amazing. And when you think about the commercial fishing boat, like, you've had gnarly experiences in the mountains. I have read and heard about gnarly experiences on the water. Was there anything that you experienced that was pretty crazy on the water, or was it smooth sailing?
There definitely was. That second trip where I made $10,000 on the 48-hour halibut opener, we were out there. The weather was coming up, and we were just killing it. The fish were on our hooks, and we were hauling them in, and we still had time to set more gear. And we took a vote. Who wants to set more gear? Is this amount of halibut that we have, is this enough? And, I think I wanted to fish more, but the consensus was no, let's stop fishing and let's start running this fish back and get it off the boat. And then the captain determined that we could make 25 more cents a pound if we drove the fish to Seattle. And so we decided to do that. And that's a long multi-day run where we're doing wheel watches, and we're get into the Georgia Straits down off the coast of Canada, close to Washington. We get pinned in a huge storm in a small channel, and the waves are coming over the boat, shit's ripping off the top, and our captain has to run wheel watch. And I think for probably 14 hours, we didn't move. We just jogged straight into the waves. We had one boat cross our bow that we almost collided with in the middle of the storm. And eventually we were able to jog out of that storm and get in a bay and hide out and let the rest of it pass. That for me was the rowdiest, experience that I had on the boats. We weren't doing the winter crabbing that is so rowdy, but that fall, spring longlining could get pretty sporty. Boats were definitely going down and things were happening. But it was generally, summer fishing was not what you see on Deadliest Catch for the most part, aside from that one experience in the Georgia Straits that I had.
Okay, so my last question for this round, and when I say this round, we're only halfway through your Life and Time's Not Even. So I asked you earlier if you would do a part 2. You've agreed, so that's awesome. Thank you for that. But we might as well find out, because you guys have got the money, you've bought the camera. Who are the major players that start TGR? Like when you think about the founders, while you and Todd get all the credit or, are in the forefront, who are the main guys who created it? Is it you and Todd only?
You mean me and Steve?
Yeah, I mean you and
No,
Steve.
No, it was me, Steve, Dirk Collins, and Corey Gavitt. And those guys were both with us for more than half of the run, and then, we had been in deep for 15 years. You had 4 founders, 4 equal partners. And I think, Corey had some health issues, and so he wanted to tap out. And then Dirk just at the time had some opportunities that were enticing to him, and ended up going and helping found this thing called Epic Quest, and took one of our TV series that was on Fuel TV, and he exited. But that first half, those first 15, those most epic kind of pure glorious years were the 4 of us step in step, every decision, every move, living the dream, traveling the world, grinding this thing out, getting it to a place where it would be somewhat remotely a real thing that might stick around for a long period of time.
Cool, man. Well, now we're at the point in the show that I call Inappropriate Questions. And we could have a field day with these, but I know you have kids, and I'm not going to put you under that kind of pressure. So I got a guy who is heavily vested in TGR, who's not going to put his own career on the line for this podcast. He puts his life on the line for you. I'm talking about longtime TGR legend Ian Macintosh. And Ian is going to ask the inappropriate questions. And are you ready for question number 1 from Ian?
Fire away.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, so Todd, TGR's motto is tight loose. What is the most tight loose story that you can remember from TGR days?
Goodness, you should have given me some time to think that. The tight loose motto is you got to run super tight. You have to run a super tight program. So like really tight safety, really tight preparation, really tight planning. That can allow you to get loose and get radical in the mountains and drop some of these crazy first descents and do some of these things. That also is like when you get us after a 5-day run of slaying it and running a really tight ship up super early. What's the loose version of that? All the riding that went down, and then the celebration of that at the end. So I would say, probably not one particular moment jumps out, but after some of those really, really epic AK sessions, the storm moves in and the crew goes out to let loose on the town.
All right, well, we will leave that one at that, and we will go with his question at number 2.
In the many years that TGR has been operating, can you think of anyone that got themselves kicked out of the family for being completely inappropriate?
Putting you on the spot for a name.
I know. I don't recall anyone in particular. I think that we were talking earlier about does this person travel well? Are they in it for the right reasons? Are they a team member? Are they a group player? I think that there's certainly been people that we've moved on from because they just don't seem like they're stoked to be doing what they're doing with the people they're doing it. But there's never been a definitive, you're kicked out.
All right, well, we will go with your final inappropriate question.
Is there anyone that you've had on the roster over the years that when you introduced them to the backcountry was a complete idiot and basically had to be taught from square one?
All right, the rookies.
Tossed from square one. I don't. I mean, he should have prodded me with an example because I don't particularly remember. I think that there's been situations when we've gotten someone into the backcountry and we've had to reel them in and had to talk to them about the protocols. I think that in particular, my son Kai, in some of the early days as he's rising up and gaining skill, I do remember saying, as we're kind of walking into the unknown, going, Kai, do not go in front of me. And a 12-year-old kid doesn't totally know what that means. And all of a sudden, I might be in a sea of fog and mist and moving into an unknown zone that might have a cornice or something, or I might be coming onto a blind roll where there's an abbey and I'm like in a very serious mode. While we're all out there having fun, I'm in a serious mode, and maybe Kai glides in my track and gets in front of me, and maybe there's a stern dad talking to him there, but no kick out. More training, more protocol. These are the protocols. And for us, like, we try to make our safety protocols, our radio protocols, repetitive to the point of being boring and mundane.
I feel like he might have been going with more of like, have you ever gotten anybody out there who gets on a sled and just doesn't know how to ride it in deep snow? And you're like, holy shit, we got to teach this guy how to ride. I
mean, I don't know. I mean, I was not too long ago was the rookie sledder. In our sled program, we try to use the wolf pack mentality where you have the strongest out front breaking trail, setting the trail, maybe someone behind sweeping and cleaning up, because you're always bringing out like a drone operator or someone who might be really good at their particular skill set, but doesn't have the sled experience. Did he cite a particular person that you...
No, I'm going to make sure the next ones are more inappropriate, but ones that you can answer. But that was part 1 in the podcast, and we've just gotten into the whole TGR lexicon. Next week, we'll dive headfirst into the athletes, the content, and the empire you've created. I would say your impact on the sport is undeniable, and it's an honor to have you on. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to part 2.
Thanks, Mike. Me as well.
So that was part 1 with Todd Jones, and what a cool story so far, and it gets even better in part 2. And while I usually have a lot to ask of you, I'm not asking anything this week. Yes, I do want you to review me wherever you listen, and if you do review me and I read it on the podcast, you will win something awesome from me. But I'm not going to read a review this week or beg for you to review, because I'm going to get ready for the Apple Cup and save my voice for the coming weeks, as while you know my guest list is the best in snow by far, I have an incredible list lined up through March. No one else even comes close. So thank you for listening, and please support the brands that make this show happen. They are Peter Glenn Skiing Sports, Elan Skis, Stanley, Outdoor Research, and Best Day Brewing. Have a great week, everyone.